November the 5th, 2015, and it's not Wednesday today, it's Thursday. Apologies in advance for not being able to bring you the podcast yesterday on Wednesday. We are human after all, and after a tired day's work, I'm sure my partner, as always, Baden Westerweller, will admit that it was a bit difficult to do it yesterday. So I'm Jawad Yakub, as always. Baden, how are you feeling today?
Yes, I must apologise personally as the cause of that delay. A bit of an odd shift owing to the Melbourne Cup holiday, which put the working roster out of form a little bit from the normal schedule, which would see me have a free day on the Wednesday, and thus it was that I was in no real shape to conduct proceedings last night. But I'm refreshed now. I hope you're not too bad, having had your own full day at the office. But certainly we've got plenty to discuss.
Yeah, very much so. And not the least, the Mexican Grand Prix, which was run and won by Nico Rosberg on the Sunday, a dominant victory for the Germans, something we haven't seen from him since Austria, which is going back to, I think, June, maybe late May and early June. So a lot of time in between drinks for Nico Rosberg as well. And then we've got a lot of news as well coming in from the Mexican Grand Prix weekend. John Todd made a rare appearance, the FIA president, at the Grand Prix, and discussing engine politics and a cost cap. We'll also look at the latest on Red Bull's engine situation as well. We had news of a pair of shock resignations from two Manor-Marussia stalwarts. We'll have more on that as well. Force India, are they set to undergo a rebrand to Aston Martin perhaps? And also for Nostalgia Straight, we'll look at 2008, and this was happened the other day, actually, on the 2nd of November, so a few days ago, and that was 2nd of November in 2008. Lewis Hamilton wrapped up his first title, and just have a look at that and see, look back at how things were for him then. I know we talked about him last week as well after he won his third World Championship, but the first one, what it meant, what he was like back then, and how he's evolved as a character. So without further ado, Mexican Grand Prix, and I have to say, Baden, it was welcomed wholeheartedly by the entire F1 community, fans, the critics, the media, everybody, and the drivers, the teams, they all loved it.
Certainly the warmth is, in terms of being reciprocal between the teams and personnel and spectators, it's almost unparalleled to any existing circuit on the calendar. You see lots of circuits where the drivers say, oh, they want to come here and the fans are really adoring of them, but you come back here after more than 2 decades off the calendar and it's like they've never been away. The existing cohort of the locals there, they really seem to get behind it, not just out of fascination for this contrived thing which is Formula One, all of the machinations which ensue, but they genuinely seem like rusted on fans, and it was really great to see that finally come to life after many years of preparation.
Almost like a Japanese Grand Prix or Brazilian Grand Prix level of fans over there. So that was very, very good to see, and a lot of people really liked the fact that the podium was set up not in the usual place in pit lane, but in front of the stadium section. So the podium was conducted in front of 40,000 people, packed to the rafters in the grandstand. So all the drivers who made it to the podium, they were just in awe. They felt like rock stars. That was the feedback that they said. So we'll talk about those, the drivers who were on the podium, and it was Nico Rosberg standing on the top step, converting his pole position to a 4th win of 2015. It's hard to believe in that highly dominant Mercedes car, but yes, it's only his 4th win of the season. Lewis Hamilton was able to match a few fastest laps with his teammate, but couldn't quite get close to him on track, hence Rosberg's dominant victory. And it was also the 10th 1-2 finish for the team, Mercedes-AMG, for the season.
Well, when you look at it, really, it's they just blur between each race. You don't know exactly in which order they form this this clean sweep of the 1-2, but it's been so common not just this year but last year as well. They've got to be about 20 across the 2 seasons now, and it's testament to them. As much as you can get carried away and say, oh, Mercedes again, they're clearly formed now as one of the great combinations throughout Formula One's history.
Yeah, certainly one of the most dominant cars in Formula One history, the WO5. But yeah, we predicted in our Saturday podcast or Sunday podcast that there would be a dramatic run into Turn One. However, that didn't occur. The biggest tangle I guess we saw in Turn One was between Sebastian Vettel and Daniel Ricciardo. Vettel subsequently had his race ruined, not just because of that, but it put him back a fair way. He had the puncture, and then he spun out at Turn 7, and then eventually came back and hit the wall at Turn 7, ending his race. And that was, I think, the first retirement that Sebastian Vettel's had since the Austrian Grand Prix in 2014. So it was a torrid race for Ferrari, but one that they're not crying over it too badly, considering the season that they have. Perhaps Kimi Räikkönen maybe for his incident with Valtteri Bottas once again. And I think I made this comment the other day saying Bottas came from Russia with love. How apt, considering the Williams cars were carrying 007 sponsorship for the weekend for the upcoming Spectre movie. So
Oh, let's hold our sarcastic hats inside. But yes, it's fair to say it's very applicable there. There was a lot of fallout, I guess, between the two compatriots there, and each for its own. It's pretty harmless in the longer picture now that the championship's off the table for all concerned there. And from Ferrari's point of view, it really was just the culmination of what was a really forgettable weekend. Their first truly poor outing for the season, and considering, I guess, the overachievements that they've enjoyed this season, they're not going to be really from, well, the man himself, Maurizio Arrivabene, he's not getting too flustered. He said probably almost not a bad thing to have this, just to recalibrate themselves for a full-on bid next season.
Very much so, but we have to emphasize once again, whilst Vettel has had quite a bit of success this season, it's just bad luck on top of bad luck. It's compartmentalizing as every race goes on.
Oh, and you get to a point when you see these crashes, he's almost at the point where it's, well, another one chalked up. Just get to the end of the year and we focus on 2016. If anything happens, I lose podium. Who gives a stuff? He really is at the point, I think, where he's just mentally he's checked out on 2015, and anything that really does go on, it's just a case of shaking off, getting ready for the next race, and he's bound to run into some kind of fortune 2016.
One would hope so, certainly. Kimi is, as voted by the fans, the favourite driver of Formula One from that GPDA survey that was held earlier in the year. But it was interesting to see that neither driver blamed each other in the crash. So just a racing incident. But it did spawn a belated podium for Williams. It's only been the third podium for Williams this season. Bottas ended up picking it up, and it's hard to believe. And I know you continuously emphasise how Britain was a lost opportunity for the Grove team, but 3 podiums to I can't even count how many Ferrari have had this season. But yeah, considering in this part of the season last year, Williams were quite strong. They were on the podium almost every race from Belgium onwards to Abu Dhabi.
It's certainly not a drastic step back, but they've been usurped by Ferrari in a big way. And if they want to have any chance of reassuming that best of the rest mantle, then they've really got their work cut out. And it is hard to, as much as they've squandered opportunities, to see that happening next season. And the seldom ones that have arisen this season, such as Britain, they just squandered it for whatever reason. Not just there, other opportunities to pick up a second or a third. And at this point now, they're in this position where instead of podiums every other race, it's just here or there. And it's just I don't know, it's a bit disappointing. People really thought they were going to make that evolution to, if not one victory, then several this season. And going into 2016, it's hard to really say exactly whether they're going to just remain around that level or have some kind of jump to the point where they can take on these manufacturers.
Okay, very much so. And Yeah, so good job by Bottas. Second podium for him this year. But Williams have pretty much sealed out third in the Constructors' Championship. So that's 2 years in a row they're going to finish third. Bottas is now fourth in the standings as a result of his podium and the non-finish by Kimi Raikkonen. So he's ahead of him by 3 points now. But let's go back into the race. And yeah, we thought that Mercedes would be one-stopping. But then there was a call for a second stop for both cars, not just one of them, and everyone was surprised. Even Lewis Hamilton was dubious about the team's call. He was questioning it, but in the end, Niki Lauda justified the call to pit them again, saying that they had the time over the third place car to pit and make sure that they don't get any late graining in the race. So do you think that's enough justification for Mercedes? They, on safety grounds, they thought that the tyres would have dropped off towards the end of the race, and because they had such a lead over the third place Danny Kvyat, why don't we just pit them and they can run to the end of the race safely?
Oh, they were streets ahead as it was. It was never really in jeopardy unless there was a real catastrophe precipitated by potential tyre blowout. But really, they've wrapped both titles up now, and they're at the point they just want to be on show. As long as a Mercedes is first and a Mercedes is second, and it's all well and good. But from Nico Rosberg's point of view, clearly that insistence that Hamilton did make a second stop, that shored it up for the German. And little bit of talk going around that possibly they wanted to appease Nico, considering his frustration in the fallout from United States. But as it was, he drove a very solid race. He saw off Hamilton's advances into turn one, and it's not as though it was this notion of, if they didn't stop, or they did and Hamilton didn't, he didn't, Hamilton didn't stop again, it would have been all over and he's bad. Clear that safety car intervened.
Well, that's the reason. Well, that's the reason Hamilton, yeah. Well, isn't that the reason that Hamilton would have questioned his team, saying, maybe if I stay out, I could have a chance of beating him?
You could see, though, clearly he was at a point where he wasn't going to argue the point once he made his feelings clear, and Mercedes gave him the Morse code that he must make that second stop. He didn't go on and have any little petulant rising against the orders. Now he's got his title, I guess. There's no point in really stirring the wounds, especially on the Rosberg camp.
Very much so, and considering what happened in Monaco as well, a lot of trust in between him and the team would have been shaken, considering they essentially lost him the Monaco Grand Prix. I guess 50-50, it was his fault as well. But as well, you have a lot of faith in the team. But anyway, moving it on. And later in the race, there was no answer from Danny Kvyat, who was running third, to Valtteri Bottas. Bottas took third eventually. Felipe Massa missed out on fifth from Daniel Ricciardo. The Honey Badger was able to seal out fifth position, and as a result, a good bag of points for Red Bull, considering only scored 1 point a week ago in Austin. So good on them to get fourth and fifth. The home favourite, the home hero, whatever you want to call him, Sergio Perez, he didn't pit under the safety car like a lot of others did around him, but he was able to hang on to eighth position, which, in front of his home fans, they were delighted that he was in the points. Even though he finished position below his teammate Nico Hülkenberg, still, well, everyone was happy for Perez to pick up those points in eighth.
Oh, absolutely. As long as he's highlighted in some way. Clearly he was running very strongly in those middle stages, and these little incidents, such as a safety car's appearance, just like they can't be predicted. And ultimately, yeah, he's got a good future ahead now. He's got a multiple-year deal, essentially, with Force India, and possibility of even going up to a better team the way that his form's been pretty much the back half of this campaign. And, yeah, from the first time out again, you can't ask for a lot more.
Very much so. And rounding out the points, Max Verstappen for Toro Rosso again, ninth for him. And then at the end, we had a nice little battle going in between the two Lotuses. Roman Grosjean prevailed in the end for 10th, past Maldonado, just behind him there in 11th. No points for Sauber. Felipe Nasser actually retired with a break he lost his brakes. They were actually on fire at one point. Carlos Sainz had a bit of a unfortunate race, a lot of mistakes. He was fighting with Sergio Perez for quite a bit as well, and I think the pair almost came together, but then one of them had to use the runoff. And another dismal race for McLaren. Jenson Button in 14th. Fernando Alonso in his 250th Grand Prix parked the car at the end of the first lap. Just been dismal outings, and so many people are actually using the word crisis now inside the McLaren camp. So,
well, on the Spaniard, he did mention in the post-race, he in fact knew that this engine was going to expire. He simply took his spot on the grid just so he could at least show his appreciation to the fans, and that's a big way to go, knowing full well that within a couple of kilometers, if that, then his race is going to be over. That it's just a state of how diabolical things are within that operation right now.
yeah, very, very sad to see. Just going out for a lap and knowing that your car's terminally ill. It's not what we want to see. Alexander Rossi, for the fourth race against his teammate Will Stevens, finished ahead in 15th, and Will Stevens 16th. So that rounds out the results. One stat I wanted to bring up: this is the first time that both Ferraris have been classified as DNF since the Australian Grand Prix in 2006, and that was Michael Schumacher and Felipe Massa. So it's been almost a decade since we had two Ferrari cars retire from a race.
Well, it shows you, even if they're not claiming the titles, they're ultra consistent, whether it's fighting for podiums or being solidly in that top three outfit bunch. They just really are always somewhere thereabouts. And if not, the cars, the engine, the donkeys, you like to refer to it at the back, it never really lets them down. And as we saw even on Sunday, it wasn't due to these kind of issues which precipitated both of the cars
It was
not
external
making
problems. Yeah, it was external issues for the Ferraris this time round. But we'll have a look at the championship standings now. Rosberg has retaken second in the standings. He's now 21 points ahead of Vettel because of Vettel's retirement. And as I already mentioned before, Bottas is now up to fourth behind Sebastian Vettel, but he's ahead of Kimi Raikkonen now by 3 points. And there's also only 4 points between the Red Bull guys as well, Kvyat and Ricciardo. So a lot to play for those guys. But that's it for the Mexican Grand Prix. We'll move it on now. And Jean Todt, how many times do we see him at a Formula One race these days? So it was a rare visit for the FIA president, and he made his intentions clear, and he made a proposal for a 12 million euro limit on the current power units for customers. So that's how much manufacturers should, as a limit, be able to charge their customers. But that was rebuked by the manufacturers, and Ferrari had vetoed last week, as we said, the notion of having a budget cap on the power units. And Mercedes, Toto Wolff, revealed that they already incur a big loss on selling them for 20 million euros to their customers. And to paraphrase what he said, to have the most competitive engine for our partners, we must spend substantially to develop them. So, is there ever going to be a compromise?
When you look at it, it's just hand in hand. It's a tail wag the dog or vice versa. They're in the sport where they're going to lose millions regardless, whether it's a marketing tool, or there for success, or they're there for the good, just generally of all of these independents. It all boils down. The fact is that money is going to go out, and in whichever shape it returns, they're going to lose something. And for them, considering that the parlous state that we find several outfits, you really have to look at them with a bit of skepticism when you see some teams day to day. It's a survival fight, and the Mercedes, clearly they're not at risk of going under anytime soon. And to that end, there was a bit of an amusing thought from Vijay Mallya. He wasn't going as far as saying he would sign up, but he would use this notion as a bit of leverage against a Mercedes power supply continuation, and that could give him a better hand to perhaps end up being even more economically saved, I guess, from the state that they are, and when they do have to pay up a fair bit of money to acquire these engines as a
Well,
supplier, as a customer.
well, 20 million euros is for an engine, supply. That is quite a lot of money. That's ridiculous. But one point that I wanted to make as well, along with along with other people who commented on my piece from last week about the alternative engines and why it could be good. A lot of team owners as well and people in the sport, including Sauber as well, have refuted the idea of having that alternative engine, saying that, arguing the same old thing about it becoming a two-tier formula or no parity between the engines and, having the usual gripe, but they haven't really suggested anything, any other solutions. I mean, that expert on the Raw in his piece, didn't really suggest any alternatives to making the current situation better. Whereas, I pointed out that this could potentially be a lifesaver for some teams. I didn't say that, it must happen. I just said, here's some of the positive aspects of it, and there you go.
Well, it's pretty hard, really. Just no consideration of how it is when you're enmeshed within an organisation which just they've got clearly the concerns of all their employees at hand, what the stakeholders, the shareholders want out of it. They've got to be acting in the best interests of many different parties, and really when you have this dismissive view, oh no, let's not do that, and end of story. There's no alternative, even just not if it's going to be a serious contention, but any kind of idea, oh, possibly this could be some kind of compromise. It's just not even floated at all. It's really, the people, I guess, on the outside, these kind of people, they just don't consider how it is inside Formula One. It's a very complicated structure, the way it works, and they really are a very fine line.
I guess this would be a pretty naive thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. But why is everyone so stubborn then? No one wants an alternative engine. No one wants to supply Red Bull, for example, which we'll talk about in a second. And no one wants to decrease engine costs. So for the sake of the sport, shouldn't there be a compromise that they should come up with? And I know if people listen to it, they're going to, or an expert listens to this will say, oh, you're so naive to say that, there's never going to be compromise in Formula One. But, you're going to keep on banging on about this and like having a go at someone for talking about potential alternatives, then fine. I like Formula One the way it is at the moment. You do as well. It could be a bit more competitive, and as you said before, they're going to lose money anyway, so we could stick to it. But, when everyone's waving their hands up in the air, or as some people say, losing their minds over finding alternatives to decrease costs or change the landscape of the sport, then, when you have your say, it should be heard.
Oh, really? Yeah. Everyone's got their own opinion, but at the end of the day, if they're not just going to broach an idea and say this is stupid and move on, no reason particular, as things are, yeah, it's not perfect. It never can be, but ultimately, yeah, someone's going to be happy and someone's not. But really, on the surface, yeah, you do get all these grand prophecies from certain individuals that they will not be named, and what that is, it's quite just air, I guess, just with no kind of buoyancy attached to it, and you wonder exactly what the whole point of their philosophy might be, but ultimately, yeah.
Oh well, we still love it. Yeah, we still love it regardless. I mean, it's our sport. We're podcasting about it, writing about it, but we still love it. But we'll move it on to Red Bull. Nice segue into Red Bull as well. And it seems that the October deadline that was set for their engine decision has been extended, because I guess 31st of October was on Saturday, and Red Bull didn't confirm anything, and Christian Horner said it's going to go on the deadline, and apparently Honda is still keen to supply Red Bull in 2016, but McLaren claim that they're not a charity, and they continue to justify their veto against supplying Red Bull. don't know what's going to happen now to Red Bull. Motorsport.com reported that Renault CEO Carlos Ghosn will consider a proposal for selling unbranded Renault engines to Red Bull. So it's not ruled out that Renault could pair up again for Red Bull for the, I guess, foreseeable future. But the question I have to ask, Baden, is that we're in November now, and usually by now that the chassis for next year would be well into a development. But without an engine, without knowing, without a whiff of who the engine supplier will be, is RB12 compromised?
Yeah, well, the whole mating process between the specific dimensions of any given power unit there, it's very specific. It's not simply a case of plonking that donkey in the rear and off you go, unless they've got possibly several tailored, modified versions of that chassis ready to go. But ultimately, they're playing it very tight for all the processes, all the parts that have to be manufactured over the winter season for them. Really, it's not ideal, but as we've harked back to a long time ago, they made their bed for themselves, and they have to eat a large dose of the humble pie, irrespective of which supplier ends up granting them engines, and whether it is a Renault in whichever capacity, whether it's just a continuation or whether it's unbadged. Yeah, they've got to really just suck it up.
Well, Didi Mateschitz actually said yesterday that there's no chance of landing a competitive engine now. So that seems pretty grim for Red Bull Racing. But no mention of Toro Rosso there at all. But yeah, they're focused quite a bit on the main outfit. And Christian Horner himself said that we are on the limit to be at the first test. So the first test, of course, is in late February, with the season kicking off in mid-March here in Australia. And yeah, it's a difficult situation, considering this is a big team. They're not limited on resources, but they just don't have an engine at the moment.
No, it's one of those ones where ultimately if they're driven it off the grid. It's going to be a loss to the sport, no doubt. But they should have laid their cards out a lot more long-term thinking perspective there, because this is a unprecedented, you might say, a team in a position where they're just driving away each potential supplier for whatever reason. They just seem to spurn them through their attitude that we must have the best and no compromise at all. And they really are playing it big with these manufacturers who've got to have their own interests at hand, first of all, before they even consider supplying what is essentially an energy drinks company.
Very much so. And I guess echoing what many people have said in the past is that they've just become a victim of their own success. So, but anyway, Horner did clarify that both Ricciardo and Kvyat will be in his cars in 2016, if that is they are on the grid. Daniel Ricciardo joked over the weekend saying that if he's not in Formula One next year, he'll definitely be taking up his buddy Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s offer of coming and racing NASCAR next year.
No
so
joke. He's saying that he might pursue NASCAR as a viable full-time career whenever his Formula One days come to an end. And certainly if he gets an opportunity next season, even if we do see Red Bull on the grid, that couple of weekends around Watkins Glen, I believe, or Road America were touted for him to participate there. So that'd be great exposure, vice versa. And hopefully you could see... clearly, Red Bull would use it as a big marketing exercise, but to see how he would excel in the stock cars there, that'd be quite something. An active
but we'd
driver.
still like to see Dan in Formula One, of course. I mean, he's been touted as a future world champion. He won those 3 races last year, those many podiums to back it up, and even through this year, it's been a bit of a character building year for him and his teammate Kvyat, who, when coming over to Red Bull Racing, being promoted from Toro Rosso, probably expected a lot more from the team, but hasn't really got it so far this season. He's had that one podium, but he's made a few mistakes too. But surely these two deserve better going into the future. And a bit of trivia, actually, if you didn't know already, the number 3 that Daniel Ricciardo races for is actually Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s number from NASCAR, who's passed away. And Ricardo went to Earnhardt Jr. and asked if he could use number 3 as his race number in Formula One, and because they're good mates or whatever, he allowed him. So there you go. That's a bit of history on Daniel Ricciardo's number 3. But we'll move it on now, and a pair of Manor-Marussia stalwarts on the exit. And it was a bit of a shock to hear as well when I heard about it from you over the weekend that John Booth and Graham Ladd are on the outer at the team.
Yeah, well, seemingly they've come to blows with the man who inherited control of the company coming into this season, Stephen Fitzpatrick, there, just about where the future's heading. And it's a real shame considering that we had this 2015 chassis, which had been said to be quite competitive. That was delayed. Obviously, the 2016 model would be a continuation of that, and coupled with very competitive machinery from Mercedes engines and the Williams gearbox and powertrain. On the other hand, they really were looking at making that leap, perhaps ahead of McLaren, and for these two not to be part of that, really a long-term step forward in the wake of everything they've been through in the last 24 months. They're going to be very conspicuous in their absence.
Yeah, well, as you said, they've been there from the beginning, I believe, since the Virgin days from 2010 when they came into the sport as Virgin.
Even beyond that, John Booth goes back 25 years to the origins of Manor, and now for it to come to such an end, it's really a shame. He couldn't have gone out at least seeing his cars really taking it finally to the front runners.
And as you said, they've been through thick and thin as well with this team over the past 24 months. They saw the tragic deaths of their test driver Maria Di Villota first, and then of course the horrible accident of Jules Bianchi, which claimed his life earlier this year as well. And of course, going into administration as well at the end of last year as well after the Bianchi accident. It was a dark time for this team and for these two in particular, who I guess as many have said over social media and meeting people as well, that these are some of the nicest guys in the Formula One paddock, and they're very good with the fans as well. And yeah, certainly the fan reaction to hearing that these guys are on the exit was not good, but at the same time they have seen some positive things as well. They resurrected the team, of course, this year, and those emotional points, the first points that they scored at Monaco last season with Jules Bianchi as well. I mean, they can certainly pat them, they can hold their heads up high, but not seeing them not seeing them stay with the team as they head into the future with the Mercedes power, of course, and perhaps becoming more competitive. It's really sad to see, and we wish them the best of luck, I guess, for whatever they go on to do.
There are suggestions just quickly with Haas's imminent arrival to the grid in their base at the X factory of Manor-Marussia in Banbury. They're saying that it could be a logical fit for the duo here. If they ended up taking on some capacity at Haas next season, it would be quite a seamless tie-in, and they'd get to continue their presence on the grid, and that would be a great thing to see, clearly with quite a competitive car ostensibly there, and they're clearly two men who are very well liked, so it'd be brilliant to see them continue their presence in the paddock.
We all certainly hope so. Wish them the best of luck for the future. And another thing that came out over the weekend, and honestly, I think I already mentioned this on the Sunday podcast, but I thought it was an April Fool's joke that you sent me, that Force India are potentially set to undergo a rebrand to Aston Martin Racing. And Vijay Mallya, the team principal, said that we're in discussion, but nothing has been finalised. But motorsport.com reported that the discussions have gone so far as having preliminary graphics of the car prepared with a striking blue and gold livery as well. So if they've gone as far as designing a graphic of the car, I guess it's pretty serious then.
Well, they've done a good job of keeping everyone out of the loop there, but if it's for the best of the company, and as well, Vijay Mallya's had his financial issues in recent years, so it's not an entire surprise. And we've already seen the back half of this season with that much touted B-spec chassis finally making its presence, and ever since then they've been moving through the grid in leaps and bounds. If next year's car's an evolution and Aston Martin, in whichever guise it is, whether it's just sponsorship, but with the heavy backing, which can enable even more resources rather than this, we develop for half a year or we focus on this aspect over another, they might be able to have an all-round package there, which sees them in contention for podiums on a regular basis, which is it's a good thing, and we'll get to see an iconic name on the grid at the same time.
Very much so. And what you talked about backing before, Diego, is it Diego you pronounce it? But yeah, the company in the company in the UK that owns a lot of alcohol brands, of course, they're looking to expand on their sponsorship with the Silverstone team. They've got Smirnoff currently on the side of the car, and they're looking at potentially switching that to Johnny Walker. And they don't want just a couple of Johnny Walker logos on the car. They actually want, to be the majority of sponsorship to be from Johnny Walker. So they're looking at pouring in a lot of money into this. And Johnny Walker, who currently sponsor McLaren, they're set to end their lengthy association with the team this year off the back of their poor performance for the season. So that's another sponsor gone from McLaren. But for them to switch over to Force India or Aston Martin Racing, whatever you want to call it, and increase their profile, that's a good thing for them, isn't it? And as you said, it's going to be more resources.
Oh, absolutely. They've clearly had one hand tied in recent seasons, and they seem like quite a genuine operation as it is. Clearly, they have their origins dating back to the Jordan days. That's about 25 years ago now. So they've got quite a loyal crew there, and it'd be nice to see them rewarded with the full resources as it is, just to pursue that goal without having to really just prioritise any particular part of a season over another. And they've got two very skilled drivers there who, with the right machinery there, that they can definitely be winners at some point.
Well, let's head over to Nostalgia Straight now, and we'll look back at the season that Force India actually made its debut in 2008, but we're not going to talk about Force India. We're going to talk about Lewis Hamilton, because it would have been more apt if we did this podcast a few days ago, because November the 2nd in 2008 was the day that we saw Lewis Hamilton clinch his maiden title in Brazil. The 5 victories that he claimed that season helped him beat Ferrari's Felipe Massa by 1 point. In the end, it was that infamous overtake on Timo Glock for 5th, I think it was, to claim the title. And Felipe Massa, who won the race, he believed that he was world champion, but all for but 30 seconds, I think it was. So, back then he was a fresh-faced young graduate from McLaren's ranks. He'd been groomed by Ron Dennis himself to become a world champion for McLaren, and there he was, 2008, his second season in Formula One, and this fresh-faced boy from Stevenage in the UK was world champion.
Oh, it's seared into my mind, especially that it was morning in Australia, of course, about a 3 a.m. wake up, and just the tension, not least in the final 5 laps. There was a bit more rain which came, and suddenly that threw everything off the table. And then from then on, it's all really a bit of a blur. And from the point of view as a Ferrari supporter, I was right behind Massa, and then to be heartbroken, see Hamilton get over the line, it was quite devastating. But at the same time, considering his situation back then and all that was made of it, clearly it was like a fairy tale rise through the ranks. And the way we always hear the man himself these days refer to how tough he did it back then, everyone got behind him like, oh, this guy's come from nothing, and within 2 years he's a champion. And the way that he had the courage to speak to Ron when he was a 12-year-old, and how he's now realised that dream. It was something you couldn't make up, really, and just the circumstances around it. It's etched in folklore now, really. And when you look through the years, that's the one that most people are going to remember.
But also, it also highlighted there was a long time between drinks then for Hamilton. I think it went down in history as the longest wait for a world champion to go and win his second world championship. 2014, of course, last year is when he won championship number 2.
Still waiting on Fernando Alonso's third title.
Yeah, still Fernando waiting on his third title, but yeah, it was a long time from 2008 to 2014 for Hamilton. We obviously know what happened in between there. A lot of bad luck at McLaren, and then when Jenson Button came into the team, it was pretty even keel until Button got ahead of him. In 2011, and then yeah, 2012 as well. A lot of bad luck when he eventually made the decision to move to Mercedes, which back then no one really, as we said last week, no one gave him credit for. But today you hail it as a masterstroke. So
Oh, certainly. People at the time said it was a career suicide akin to Jacques Villeneuve moving on from the erstwhile dominant team of the 90s, Williams there to BAR, and we saw what happened to him. He was barely ever heard of again from that point, but clearly for Hamilton, he was in good company with Ross Brawn there, and then ultimately Niki Lauda jumped on board at the same time, and the rest is history, and got to give him the credit, really. Clearly Mercedes spent their time when they made that factory return acquiring Brawn end of 2009. It was a coming together at the right moment of the man who was entering the prime of his career with a well-oiled operation there, and you see as it is today, who knows how many more titles he might go on to win at this point.
very much so, and that's pretty much what we said last week as well. But yeah, the 2008 one certainly quite a special season. We look back, and special season for Britain as well. Britain finally had another F1 hero that it could look up to, that had won a championship. The last one, obviously, being Damon Hill, I think, back in 1996. So since then, haven't had a British world champion in Formula One, and then the year after, Jenson Button went on to win that as well. So a special couple of years for Brits in Formula One. But yeah, we'll move it on. Just before we end, we've got a couple of news that yesterday they were breaking news. I really wanted to do breaking news on this podcast, but because we missed out on yesterday, we'll have to just talk about it today. Susie Wolff has announced that she will be hanging up her helmet at the end of this year. She will do the Race of Champions for Scotland, pairing up with David Coulthard in London at the end of the year. But yeah, at the end of this year, it's over for her in motorsport, and a bit sad to see, considering in this modern era of Formula One, she was really the pioneer for females to get into it, and it's a bit of a shame that we didn't get to see her race in the end, because she was there 100% on merit, wasn't she?
Oh, she gave it a red hot crack, and we saw earlier in the year, probably the writing was on the wall when they preferred Adrian Sutil to Susie Wolff for that reserve driver role. That could have been the real in to just show that she was going to be the next one in line if anything had have happened to their main drivers. But clearly she's gotten very close to it, and she's still going to have very strong ties with the entire fraternity through her husband, who spearheads Mercedes.
Yeah, so a bit sad to see. Of course, every time I've been to the Australian Grand Prix, since she took on that role with Williams, she's been probably one of the most popular figures in the paddock, because when you're waiting for your signatures at the paddock entrance, every time Susie comes along, it's like Susie, Susie, everyone's just cheering for her. So a fan favourite for sure is Susie Wolff, and she'll definitely be missed by everyone. And last bit of news before we wrap up, Pirelli have confirmed that they're going to be doing a 12-hour tyre test at the end of the season in Abu Dhabi after the final race, and that'll be the debut of their new Ultra Soft tyre. And do you want to guess which colour ended up winning the Ultra Soft tyre vote from the fans?
I've got a feeling that the Joker might be very happy with the outcome.
He didn't choose Brand X. Yes, it was purple who that got chosen over silver. Silver a bit boring, purple a lot more exciting, and yeah, I guess the good choice made. But it kind of works as well, considering red is the super, yellow is the soft, red is the super soft, and then you go up in the spectrum. I don't know, going up in the spectrum or down. Purple is the next one along. So good choice in the end, but good on Pirelli also for getting that opportunity to have their tyre test at the end of the season. They obviously said that that's a condition off their new contract with Formula One, that they need to have that testing for safety, and of course, having a new compound as well. Who knows how the racing will be on this ultra soft compound next season.
Well, certainly it's going to throw a bit of an unknown element into the mix, and if it ends up being a bit like it was a few years ago when tyre could have gone off after 3 corners, or whether it could have been bulletproof like Bridgestone's were in 2010 or prior to that, then it's about time, I guess. The tyres have faded away in importance and relevance for the past couple of years, so if it brings them back to the forefront of considerations in a race strategy, then really it's going to be very intriguing.
Very much so, and I think that's pretty much all we've got for you today. Thank you for waiting until today for our podcast, but next week we'll be back at the usual time, and we'll be previewing the Brazilian Grand Prix, the penultimate round of the season. And it's so sad, we're almost at the end of the season, another season gone. As much as it wasn't, a ripper of a season, it's just sad to be nearing the end, and go into hibernation then over the summer here.
Well, just one little bit of news. I'm just doing a bit of cleaning of the various rounds in Formula One. There's a bit of an unconfirmed report that Red Bull and Renault, not surprisingly, are going to confirm their split, but it seems that they will now continue with unbranded Renault Power, headlined by Mario Ilian in 2016. So it's not really out of the blue, but it seems as though that confirmation will be coming, and they'll still really, in some form, whichever title sponsor might overlap Renault, will be their supplier in 2016. Who knows what will be the case 2017 and beyond. So there we go. By the next podcast.
There we go. Yeah. So they chose Brand X.
Indeed.
Well, thanks for joining us. I'm Jawad as always, and Baden, thank you very much.
Ciao.